The entire terminal froze in collective horror as the unthinkable happened right before their eyes. A seasoned police canine, a dog trained to protect and serve, suddenly snapped. He didn't target a fleeing criminal or a suspicious package. Instead, the massive German Shepherd lunged with terrifying ferocity at a young, heavily pregnant woman standing in the security line. The sound of his teeth tearing into her coat mixed with her piercing screams, sending a shockwave of panic through the crowd. Passengers dropped their bags and covered their mouths in disbelief. Officers shouted commands that went ignored. For a terrifying moment, it looked like a scene of pure, unprovoked aggression. But as the handler threw his own body over the dog to stop the attack, and as the woman was rushed away, clutching her stomach in agony, no one realized that they had just witnessed the only thing standing between them and a catastrophe. The dog wasn't attacking. He was trying to tell them something. And by the time the police realized what was actually inside that woman's belly, it would be too late to stop the countdown. The day had started with the typical chaotic rhythm of Chicago O'Hare International Airport during the holiday rush. Outside, a relentless blizzard was burying the tarmac in white, delaying flights and fraying nerves. Inside Terminal 4, the air was thick with the smell of damp wool coffee and the collective stress of thousands of travelers trying to get home. The noise was a constant thrumming wall of sound. Rolling suitcases clicked against the polished terrazzo floors. Announcements echoed unintelligibly overhead, and the hum of 1,000 conversations blended into a dull roar. Officer Jack Reynolds moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of a man who had spent half his life in uniform. At 42, Jack still carried himself with the rigid posture of a former Marine, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon of faces looking for the cracks in the ordinary. Walking beside him was Bruno, a 90-pound Belgian Malinois and German Shepherd mix. To the casual observer, Bruno was just a tool of the trade, a deterrent on a leash. But to Jack, he was the only partner who had never let him down. They moved in a perfect silent syncopation. When Jack stopped, Bruno stopped. When Jack turned, Bruno turned. The dog's amber eyes were calm, intelligent, and focused, ignoring the children who pointed and the weary travelers who stepped aside to give them space. They were a single unit forged in years of service. Jack adjusted his grip on the leash, feeling the familiar leather against his palm. It was supposed to be a routine sweep of the security checkpoint, just another layer of visibility to keep the peace during the heightened alert of the holiday season. Jack glanced down at Bruno. "Good boy," he murmured, his voice low and steady. Bruno's ears flicked back to acknowledge the praise, but his nose kept working, sifting through the millions of scent particles in the air. Sweat, perfume, jet fuel, fast food, anxiety. To a human, it was just airport air. To Bruno, it was a complex map of the world. They approached the TSA checkpoint where the lines snaked back and forth in a frustrating maze. Jack watched the faces of the passengers. A businessman checking his watch every 10 seconds. A mother trying to calm a crying toddler. A group of college students laughing too loudly. It was all normal. Boring even. And Jack liked boring. Boring meant safe. Boring meant he would go home tonight and sit in his empty house and not have to think about the things he had seen in his career. But then the rhythm broke. It wasn't a sound or a visual cue. It was a feeling transmitted through the leash like an electric shock. Bruno stopped. He didn't sit, which was his signal for narcotics. He didn't lie down, which was his signal for explosives. He just froze, his entire body going rigid, his muscles coiling beneath his dark fur. A low guttural growl started deep in his chest, a sound Jack had never heard from him before. It wasn't the warning growl he gave to aggressive drunks. It was something primal, something terrified. Jack frowned, stepping closer to his partner. "Bruno, heel," he commanded softly. The dog ignored him. This was the first red flag. Bruno never ignored a command. The dog's head whipped to the left, his ears pinning back against his skull. His gaze locked onto a figure standing about 20 feet away in the priority lane. It was a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn, framed by messy blonde hair tucked under a beanie. She was wearing a thick, oversized winter coat that was unzipped, revealing a maternity shirt stretched tight over a very large, very pregnant belly. She had one hand resting protectively on her stomach and the other gripping the handle of a carry-on bag with white-knuckled intensity. She looked like any other tired mother-to-be just trying to endure the travel nightmare. Easy, Bruno, Jack said, tightening his grip on the leash. But the dog was vibrating now, a high-pitched whine mixing with the growl. The hair along Bruno's spine stood up in a jagged ridge. The woman took a step forward, and that small movement seemed to snap the last thread of Bruno's control. Without a bark, without a warning, the dog lunged. The force of it nearly pulled Jack's arm out of its socket. His boots skidded on the slick floor as he fought to hold the animal back. Bruno Jack shouted, his voice cracking with shock, but the dog was gone. The leather leash burned through Jack's hand as he stumbled forward. Bruno covered the distance in 2 powerful bounds. The crowd didn't even have time to scream before the dog collided with the woman. He didn't go for her throat. He didn't go for her legs. He launched himself straight at her midsection. The woman shrieked a sound of pure terror as the 90-pound dog hit her, driving her backward. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and fur. Passengers scattered in a panic, knocking over stanchions and trampling bags. "Get it off her," someone screamed. "Oh my God, he's killing her." Jack threw himself into the fray, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He saw Bruno's jaws clamp onto the thick fabric of the woman's coat near her abdomen. The dog was thrashing his head, growling with a ferocity that turned Jack's blood to ice. The woman was on her back, kicking and screaming, shielding her face with her arms. "My baby. Help me, my baby," she wailed, her voice tearing through the terminal. Jack grabbed Bruno's collar with both hands, digging his heels in. "Out, Bruno, out," he roared, using his command voice, the voice that could stop a suspect in their tracks. But Bruno was deaf to him. The dog's eyes were rolled back, the whites showing his pupils dilated in frenzy. He wasn't biting to wound. He was biting to hold. He was dragging the woman across the floor, pulling her away from the security scanners. Security officers swarmed the scene, their radios crackling with frantic codes. Jack saw the flash of metal in his peripheral vision. A TSA agent had drawn his weapon. Another airport police officer was leveling a taser. "Don't shoot!" Jack screamed, throwing his own body over the dog to shield him. "Do not shoot my dog." He hooked his arm under Bruno's neck, applying a chokehold not to hurt him, but to cut off his air just enough to make him release. It took seconds that felt like hours. Bruno finally gasped, his jaws slacking. Jack yanked him back, pinning the dog to the floor with his own body weight. Bruno was still thrashing, snapping his teeth at the air, his eyes locked on the woman who was now writhing on the ground a few feet away. "Stay down!" Jack hissed into the dog's ear, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. The scene was absolute chaos. The woman lay curled in a fetal position, sobbing hysterically, clutching her stomach. 2 paramedics who had been nearby rushed to her side. "Is she bitten?" One of them shouted. "Did the dog bite the stomach?" The woman was hyperventilating. "It hurts," she cried, her face twisted in agony. "I think he hurt the baby. Please, God, not my baby." A wave of revulsion and anger swept through the gathered crowd. Phones were raised like a wall of accusatory eyes, recording every second. Jack could hear the commentary. Police brutality, out of control, monster. He felt the weight of their judgment crushing him. He looked down at Bruno. The dog had stopped fighting, but he wasn't calm. He was trembling violently, letting out a low, mournful keen that sounded less like aggression and more like heartbreak. He kept trying to crawl toward the woman, not to attack, but with a desperate magnetic pull. Captain Miller, the head of airport security, pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of fury. "Reynolds," he barked, his voice cutting through the noise. "Get that animal in a crate now. You are done. Do you hear me? You are done." Jack didn't argue. He couldn't. He clipped the leash back on his hands, shaking. He hauled Bruno up, keeping the dog on a tight lead. As he dragged his partner away, Jack looked back at the woman one last time. She was being lifted onto a gurney. Her face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. But for a split second, through the gap in her fingers, Jack saw her eyes. They weren't looking at the paramedics. They weren't looking at her injury. They were looking at her bag, which had been kicked to the side in the scuffle. Her eyes were wide alert and terrified. Jack was ushered into a sterile holding room deep in the bowels of the airport. The door slammed shut, leaving him alone with the hum of the fluorescent lights and a dog that had just ended his career. He sat on a metal chair, his head in his hands. Bruno paced the small room, his claws clicking rhythmically on the linoleum. The dog wouldn't settle. He went to the door, sniffed the crack, and whined. He came to. Jack nudged his elbow and then went back to the door. Jack watched him. He had known this dog since he was a pup. He knew Bruno's every tick, every mood. He knew that Bruno was gentle with children. He knew that Bruno had once found a missing Alzheimer's patient in a swamp during a thunderstorm. This wasn't a bad dog. This wasn't a dog that snapped. Jack wiped his face, feeling the grit of the day on his skin. Why, he whispered. Why did you do it, buddy? Bruno looked at him and let out a sharp, frustrated bark. He spun in a circle and stared at the wall that separated them from the main terminal. The look in the dog's eyes wasn't guilt, it was urgency. It was the look he gave when he knew where the ball was hidden, and Jack was too stupid to find it. Jack stood up. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, gnawing suspicion. He replayed the event in his mind, the approach, the freeze, the lunge, the bite. Jack closed his eyes, visualizing the moment of impact. Bruno had hit her hard. His teeth had sunk into the coat. Jack had seen the fabric tear. If a 90-pound Malinois bites a pregnant woman's stomach, there should be blood. There should be screaming from the pain of puncture wounds, but the woman had screamed about the baby, not the bite. And when Jack had pulled Bruno off, there was no blood on the dog's muzzle, not a drop. A knock on the door startled him. It was Tony, an old friend from the surveillance unit. Tony looked pale, checking the hallway before slipping inside. Jack, he whispered, Miller is writing up the termination papers. They're talking about putting Bruno down. Liability issue. They say he's rabid. Jack felt a surge of protective rage. He's not rabid, Tony. You know that. Something set him off. Tony shook his head. It doesn't matter. The optics are a nightmare. It's all over the news. Hero Cop Dog mauls pregnant woman. You're the villain of the week, Jack. I need to see the footage, Jack said, his voice hard. Tony blinked. What no? I can't. If Miller catches me... Tony Jack stepped closer, looming over the smaller man. I was right there. I had my hands on him. His teeth didn't go through. I felt it. He didn't sink in. It was like he hit a tire. I need to see the footage. Please. For Bruno. Tony hesitated, looking at the pacing dog, then back at Jack. He sighed, pulling a tablet from under his jacket. You have 5 minutes. I was never here. Jack grabbed the tablet, his fingers trembling as he scrubbed through the timeline. He found the incident. He watched it at full speed, wincing at the violence of it. Then he slowed it down. Frame by frame, he watched the woman standing in line. She looked tired. She rubbed her back. Typical pregnant posture. Then Bruno appeared in the frame. The dog froze. The woman saw the dog. Jack paused the video. He zoomed in on the woman's face. In the split second before Bruno lunged, her expression changed. It wasn't fear of the dog. It was recognition. She stiffened. Her hand didn't go to her belly to protect it. Her hand clamped down on the handle of her carry-on bag. Jack played the video forward. Bruno launched. Impact. The woman fell backward. And this is where Jack's heart stopped. As she fell, her natural instinct should have been to curl forward to shield the fetus. Every mother does it. It is biological. It is automatic. But she didn't. She threw her arms out to break her fall. She landed hard flat on her back, and the belly... Jack rewound and played it again. The belly didn't squash. It didn't displace like soft tissue. It held its shape perfectly rigid, and when Bruno bit down, the fabric of the coat tore, revealing a glimpse of what was underneath. It wasn't skin. It was gray. It looked like silicone, but the most damning detail was the bite itself. As Bruno clamped down and shook his head, the woman's body didn't move in sync with the pull. The coat moved. The belly moved slightly. But the woman herself was anchored. It was as if the belly was a separate entity strapped to her, not a part of her. Jack lowered the tablet, his breath coming in shallow bursts. She's not pregnant, he whispered. Tony looked at him confused. What? She's not pregnant, Tony. Look at the fall. Look at the bite. It's a prosthetic. A fake. Tony squinted at the screen. Okay, so she's faking a pregnancy. Maybe she wants priority boarding. It's weird, but it doesn't justify the dog going nuclear. No. Jack stood up, pacing the room, his mind racing to catch up with his instincts. Bruno doesn't attack fake pregnancies. He ignores people unless they are a threat. He sensed something. Not just the fake belly. He sensed what was inside it. He looked at Bruno. The dog was sitting now, staring at Jack, his tail giving a single slow thump. The message was clear. Finally, you get it. Where is she? Jack asked, grabbing Tony's shoulder. Where did the ambulance take her? St. Mary's, I think, Tony stammered. Or Mercy. Wait, dispatch said they routed her to County General because of the trauma level. Jack handed the tablet back. Listen to me. Check the ambulance logs. Now. Find out if she actually arrived. Why wouldn't she arrive? Because if I'm right, Jack said, buckling his belt and checking his empty holster with a grimace, that woman isn't a patient. She's a mule. And she is carrying something that my dog thinks is going to kill us all. Tony stared at him, then tapped furiously on the tablet. He frowned. That's weird. What the transponder on Ambulance 42? It's not at County General. It stopped transmitting 10 minutes ago. We're near the industrial park, by the old rail yards. That's miles off course. Jack didn't wait. He grabbed Bruno's leash. We're leaving. You can't leave. You're under confinement. Jack looked at his friend. Tony, if that ambulance stopped in the rail yards, the paramedics are either dead or they're about to be. Open the back door. Tony hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Go. I'll jam the camera feed for 2 minutes. Jack burst out of the holding room into the biting cold of the loading dock. The snow was falling harder now, a white curtain erasing the world. He ran to his personal truck, a battered Ford parked in the employee lot. He threw Bruno into the passenger seat. The dog didn't curl up. He sat bolt upright, staring through the windshield, his nose working the vents. As Jack turned the key and the engine roared to life, he realized he had no gun, no badge, and no backup. All he had was a hunch and a dog that everyone thought was crazy. But as he looked into Bruno's eyes, he saw the same steel resolve he had seen in the eyes of Marines before a breach. We're going to find her boy, Jack whispered, shifting the truck into gear. The tires spun on the ice, then caught, launching them into the darkness of the Chicago winter. Jack drove fast, his mind piecing together the clues. The woman's fear, the fake belly, the deviation of the ambulance. It was a kidnapping or an extraction. But why the dog? Why the ferocity? Bruno let out a low whine and pawed at the dashboard. Jack looked over. The dog was staring at the glove box. Jack opened it. Inside was a spare magazine for his service weapon, useless without the gun, and an old heavy-duty flashlight. He grabbed the flashlight. It would have to do. They reached the industrial park in 20 minutes. The area was a ghost town of rusted warehouses and shipping containers buried under snow. The streetlights were sparse, casting long skeletal shadows. Jack killed the headlights, letting the truck roll silently over the packed snow. There, down a narrow alleyway between two corrugated steel buildings, he saw the boxy silhouette of an ambulance. Its lights were off. The driver's side door was hanging open. Jack parked a block away. He looked at Bruno. Quiet, he commanded. The dog understood. He slipped out of the truck like a shadow. Jack followed the cold wind biting through his uniform. They approached the ambulance using the cover of the shipping containers. The silence was heavy, unnatural. No engine noise, no radio chatter, just the wind howling through the metal structures. Jack reached the open door of the ambulance and looked inside. It was empty. No paramedics. No patient. But there were signs of a struggle. The medical kit was overturned bandages and vials scattered across the floor, and there in the center of the chaotic mess lay the coat the woman had been wearing. It was torn open. Jack climbed inside his boots, crunching on broken glass. He shone his flashlight on the floor. Next to the coat was a large curved piece of silicone. It looked like a shell. The fake belly. It had been discarded. Jack knelt to examine it. The inside of the shell was hollow, but it wasn't empty. It was lined with lead foil, and there were wires. Cut wires. His stomach dropped. Lead lining was used to block x-rays, to hide things from scanners. Whatever had been inside that belly was designed to be invisible. Bruno jumped into the back of the ambulance. He sniffed the silicone shell and immediately recoiled, sneezing violently and shaking his head. He growled at the object, backing away until he hit the ambulance doors. Jack looked closer. There was a residue inside the shell, a faint greenish liquid that hadn't frozen yet despite the cold. It smelled sharp like ozone and rotting almonds. Jack's breath hitched. He knew that smell. He hadn't smelled it since a briefing on chemical warfare threats years ago. This wasn't drugs. It wasn't cash. It was a weapon. And then from the darkness of the warehouse adjacent to them, a gunshot cracked through the air. Jack grabbed Bruno's collar and dove out of the ambulance just as a bullet sparked off the metal frame where his head had been a second ago. They rolled into the snow behind a dumpster. Bruno didn't bark. He crouched low, his muscles bunching, his eyes locked on the warehouse door. Jack realized then that the nightmare hadn't ended at the airport. It had just begun. The woman wasn't just a mule, she was a walking bomb, and whoever had taken her was now aware that they had a tail. "We're in trouble, buddy," Jack whispered, gripping the heavy flashlight like a club. Bruno looked back at him, bared his teeth in a silent snarl, and prepared to hunt. The silence in the holding room was heavier than the concrete walls enclosing it. Jack sat on the edge of the metal bench, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Every second that ticked by on the wall clock felt like an hour. He wasn't thinking about his career or the badge that had been stripped from his chest just minutes ago. He was thinking about the look in that woman's eyes. It wasn't the pain of a dog bite, it was the terror of someone who knew they were out of time. The door cracked open, slicing a wedge of fluorescent light across the floor. It was Tony, the surveillance tech, who had risked his job to show Jack the footage earlier. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. He didn't step inside. He just leaned in, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper that barely carried over the hum of the ventilation system. "Jack, you need to hear this." Jack stood up slowly, the stiffness in his knees reminding him of how hard he had hit the floor during the struggle. "What is it, Tony? Did they book her? Is she at the hospital?" Tony shook his head, looking over his shoulder to ensure the corridor was empty. "That's the problem. I just got off the comms with dispatch at County General. They were prepping a trauma room for a pregnant female with a canine bite. They had the doctors ready. They had the blood bank on standby." Jack stepped closer, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. "And she never arrived, Jack." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jack frowned, confusion warring with the rising dread in his gut. "What do you mean she never arrived? It's been 40 minutes. With sirens and lights that drive is 20 minutes tops, even in this snow." Tony swallowed hard. The ambulance went dark. The GPS transponder stopped transmitting 10 minutes after it left the terminal. It didn't break down. It didn't get stuck in traffic. It just vanished from the grid, and the paramedics aren't answering their radios. A cold chill that had nothing to do with the Chicago winter swept through Jack's body. This wasn't a medical transport. It was an extraction, or worse, a cleanup. He realized with a sickening clarity that he had been right. Bruno had been right. The woman wasn't a patient. She was cargo, and now she was gone. Jack grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. He didn't say a word, but his movement was sudden and violent. Tony stepped back, raising his hands. "Jack, don't. You're under administrative detention. If you walk out that door, you're not just suspended. You're a fugitive. Captain Miller will bury you." "Let him try," Jack growled, shoving his arms into the sleeves. "That woman is dead if I stay here, and my dog is sitting in a cage waiting to be euthanized for doing his job. I'm not letting that happen." He pushed past Tony into the hallway. The corridor was empty, the sounds of the busy terminal muffled by layers of concrete. Jack knew the layout of O'Hare better than he knew his own home. He knew the blind spots in the cameras. He knew which service doors had faulty alarms. He moved with the silent, predatory grace of a man on a mission, his boots making no sound on the linoleum. He didn't head for the main exit. He headed for the loading docks. He needed to get outside. He needed to get to the squad car where they had locked Bruno away. The blast of cold air that hit him as he pushed through the service exit was like a physical blow. The blizzard had intensified. Snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, erasing the world in a swirling white void. The wind howled across the tarmac, stinging his face and freezing the sweat on his brow. He squinted through the storm, scanning the line of parked police vehicles. There, Unit K97. His car. It was parked near the impound lot, isolated and covered in a layer of fresh snow. Jack ran toward it, slipping on the ice, his breath tearing from his lungs in white clouds. He reached the vehicle and peered through the back window. Inside the metal cage, a pair of amber eyes reflected the dim light of the street lamps. Bruno. The dog wasn't sleeping. He was sitting bolt upright, staring at the door, waiting. He didn't bark when he saw Jack. He just let out a low, vibrating whine that sounded like pure relief. Jack fumbled with his keys, his fingers numb from the cold. He unlocked the back door and swung it open. The moment the latch clicked, Bruno pushed against the gate. "I'm sorry, buddy," Jack whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry I didn't listen." He opened the cage. Bruno leaped out into the snow, shaking his fur. He didn't run. He didn't play. He immediately looked up at Jack, His ears pricked, his body tense. He knew. He knew they weren't done. He knew the threat was still out there. Jack knelt in the snow, ignoring the wet cold soaking into his jeans. He grabbed Bruno's head with both hands, looking deep into the dog's eyes. "You were right, Bruno. She's in trouble. We have to find her." Bruno licked Jack's chin, once a rough, quick gesture of forgiveness, and then turned his head to the wind, sniffing the air. But the wind was chaotic, swirling with jet fuel and exhaust. They needed a focus. They needed a scent. Jack cursed. He had nothing. The woman was gone. The ambulance was gone. The trail was cold. Then he remembered. During the struggle in the terminal, when he had thrown his body over Bruno to shield him, his tactical vest had snagged on something. He remembered feeling a tear, a pull. He reached into the deep pocket of his heavy winter coat, his fingers brushing against something soft and out of place. He pulled it out. It was a piece of fabric, a torn strip of a scarf. It was wool patterned with snowflakes, the same scarf the woman had been wearing. It must have ripped off when Bruno lunged, or when Jack dragged the dog back. It wasn't much, a scrap of cloth no bigger than his hand, but to a nose that could detect a single drop of blood in a gallon of water, it was a road map. Jack held the fabric down to Bruno's nose. "Find her," he commanded, his voice low and intense. "Find." Bruno buried his nose in the wool. He took a deep, loud breath, processing the complex chemical signature of the woman. Her fear, her sweat, the faint metallic smell of the thing she was carrying. The dog's head snapped up. He sneezed to clear his palate, then lowered his nose to the ground. He began to circle, cutting through the snow, ignoring the overwhelming odors of the airport. He moved in widening arcs, his tail straight, his focus absolute. Suddenly, Bruno stopped. He stood near the edge of the service road where the tire tracks of a heavy vehicle were rapidly being filled by the snow. He looked back at Jack and barked. Once. Sharp and decisive. He had it. Jack ran to his personal truck, an old beat-up Ford he kept parked in the employee lot nearby. He didn't care about the rules anymore. He threw the passenger door open for Bruno, who jumped in without hesitation. Jack climbed into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life with a protest against the cold. As he pulled out of the lot, following the direction of Bruno's gaze, Jack's phone buzzed. It was a text from Tony. "They know you're gone. State police are being notified." Jack turned back. Jack threw the phone onto the dashboard. He couldn't turn back. The image of the woman's terrified eyes burned in his mind. She wasn't a criminal. She was a victim, and whoever had her now wasn't planning on letting her go. He steered the truck onto the dark, slick roads leading away from the airport. The snow was blinding, the headlights cutting only a few feet into the white abyss. He was driving blind, guided only by the instincts of the animal sitting beside him. Bruno stood on the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the cold glass of the windshield, his eyes tracking something in the darkness that Jack couldn't see. Every few minutes the dog would whine or tap the glass with his paw, correcting their course. They were hunting, and in the heart of the storm, with the entire police force looking for them, Jack and Bruno were the only hope that woman had left. The chase was on, and the clock was ticking down to 0. The drive into the industrial sector felt like navigating the surface of a frozen, dead planet. The blizzard had erased the road markers, leaving only the skeletal outlines of abandoned factories and smokestacks to guide them. Jack gripped the steering wheel with numb fingers, his eyes darting between the white void ahead and the dog sitting rigid in the passenger seat. Bruno was no longer just a passenger. He was the radar, the compass, and the weapon. The dog's nose was pressed against the glass, his breath fogging the window in small, rhythmic clouds. Every few seconds, a low growl would rumble in his throat, a vibration that Jack could feel through the frame of the truck. They were close. The truck lurched over a hidden pothole, the suspension groaning in protest before coming to a stop behind a mountain of rusted shipping containers. Bruno barked once, sharp and decisive, and pawed at the door handle. Jack didn't hesitate. He killed the engine and pushed the door open, the wind instantly howling into the cabin like a physical blow. They were parked at the edge of a sprawling derelict rail yard. In the distance, half buried in the snowdrift, stood a massive, corrugated metal warehouse. Its windows were shattered, looking like jagged teeth against the dark sky, but there was a faint, unnatural glow coming from inside. Jack moved low, using the containers as cover, his hand gripping the heavy Maglite flashlight like a club. It was the only weapon he had left. Bruno moved beside him, a dark shadow against the snow, placing his paws with a silent precision that defied the chaos of the storm. As they neared the warehouse, the smell hit them. It wasn't just the rust and oil of the trains, it was the sharp antiseptic sting of rubbing alcohol and something sweeter, something cloying and wrong. The side door of the warehouse had been forced open, the metal twisted back. Jack signaled for Bruno to wait, then sliced the pie around the corner, peering into the gloom. The space was cavernous, filled with the skeletons of old train cars and piles of rotting pallets, and there in the center of the concrete floor sat the missing ambulance. It looked small and vulnerable in the vast space, its rear doors wide open, spilling light onto the dirty floor. But there was no movement, no sound of radios, no paramedics rushing about, just a heavy, suffocating silence. Jack moved in his boots, making no sound on the oil-stained concrete. He reached the back of the ambulance and looked inside. The sight made his stomach turn. Two paramedics were slumped against the interior cabinets, their bodies bound with heavy-duty zip ties. Their heads hung low, chins resting on their chests. Jack rushed to them, checking for pulses. They were alive, their hearts beating slow and heavy. He pulled back an eyelid. The pupil was pinned. They had been drugged, sedated with military-grade efficiency. Whoever had done this hadn't panicked. They had executed a plan. Bruno jumped into the ambulance, sniffing the air frantically. He ignored the unconscious men and went straight to a pile of discarded medical waste in the corner. He let out a sharp whine and backed away, sneezing violently. Jack turned his light to where the dog had been looking. Lying amidst the torn wrappers and bloody gauze was the object that had started it all, the pregnancy belly. But now that it was detached from the woman, its true nature was horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just a prosthetic pad. It was a complex piece of engineering. The outer skin had been sliced open, revealing a honeycomb structure of clear tubing and electronic components. It looked like the inside of a computer, but wet. Jack leaned closer, shining his light into the cavity of the device. The tubes were shattered. A thick, viscous blue liquid was leaking out, pooling on the floor of the ambulance. It sizzled faintly as it touched the metal, releasing that sweet, toxic smell. Wires dangled from the center red and black cables that had been cut with precision. This wasn't a container for drugs. It was a housing unit, a biological containment system designed to keep something alive, or perhaps to keep it stable, and it was empty. Whatever had been inside that blue suspension had been taken. The woman was gone. The payload was gone. Jack reached out to touch the casing, but Bruno snarled, snapping his jaws inches from Jack's hand. The dog grabbed Jack's sleeve and yanked him back away from the blue puddle. Jack realized with a jolt that the liquid was likely toxic. Bruno wasn't just being aggressive. He was being a hazmat detector. Suddenly, the air in the warehouse changed. It wasn't a sound, but a pressure shift. The wind outside had covered the noise of an approach. Bruno spun around, facing the open warehouse bay doors, his hackles rising into a razor-sharp ridge. He didn't bark. He went completely silent, dropping into a low crouch, his muscles coiling like steel cables. Jack killed his flashlight instantly, plunging them into the ambient gloom of the storm-lit night. He grabbed the door of the ambulance and pulled it almost shut, leaving a crack to see through. Headlights swept across the high windows of the warehouse. Tires crunched over the gravel outside. A black SUV, sleek and armored, rolled into the bay, followed by a second. Doors opened. Men spilled out. They didn't look like street thugs. They wore tactical gear, night vision goggles, and carried suppressed rifles that hung easily from their shoulders. They moved with the synchronized fluidity of a hit squad. "Clean it up," a voice echoed through the warehouse. Distorted and cold. "No loose ends. Burn the vehicle. Leave the bodies." Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. They were here to erase the evidence, and that meant erasing him and the paramedics. He was trapped in a metal box with two unconscious men and a dog armed with nothing but a flashlight against a squad of professional killers. He looked at Bruno. The dog was trembling not with fear, but with the anticipation of violence. Jack put a finger to his lips. Bruno understood. He didn't make a sound. Footsteps approached the ambulance. Heavy boots on concrete. The beam of a tactical light sliced through the crack in the doors, missing Jack's face by inches. "Check the back," a voice said just feet away. Jack tightened his grip on the heavy flashlight. He had one chance. If they opened the doors, he would have to swing. But before he could move, Bruno took the initiative. The dog didn't wait for the door to open. He didn't wait for a command. He squeezed through the small gap between the doors and the frame, exploding out of the ambulance like a fur-covered missile. He hit the first mercenary in the chest, silent and deadly. The man didn't even have time to scream before he was knocked flat onto his back, the wind driven from his lungs. Bruno didn't stay to maul him. He was already moving a blur of motion in the shadows. He scrambled up a stack of crates and launched himself at a hanging work light that the mercenaries had set up. With a snap of his jaws, Bruno tore the power cord. Sparks showered down like fireworks, and the main area of the warehouse plunged into near total darkness. Confusion erupted among the squad. Contact, contact. Someone shouted, "I can't see the target." It's fast. Jack kicked the ambulance doors open and rolled out, staying low. The darkness was his ally now. The mercenaries were disoriented, their night vision flaring from the sparks. Jack swung the heavy mag light, connecting with the knee of the nearest gunman. There was a sickening crunch, and the man went down. Jack didn't stop. He grabbed the falling man's rifle, but before he could raise it, a laser sight swept across his chest. He was exposed. A mercenary on the catwalk above had him dead to rights. Jack froze, staring down the barrel of the gun in the darkness, knowing he couldn't move fast enough. The trigger finger tightened, but the shot never came. From the darkness above, a shadow detached itself from the rafters. Bruno had circled around. He didn't bark. He simply dropped. He landed on the sniper's back, 90 pounds of kinetic energy hitting with bone-breaking force. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as the man tumbled over the railing, screaming as he fell to the concrete floor below. Bruno landed cat-like on a crate, his eyes glowing green in the scattered laser lights. He let out a roar, a sound so primal and terrifying that the remaining mercenaries hesitated. That split second was all Jack needed. He grabbed a canister of fire extinguisher from the wall and hurled it toward the group, then scrambled back into the shadows of the train cars. Fall back. The ambush is compromised, the leader shouted, but they weren't falling back. They were regrouping. Jack could hear them whispering, coordinating a sweep. He was cornered. He had Bruno, but they were outnumbered 10-1. He needed a way out, and he needed it now. He looked at the blue liquid pooling near the ambulance. The fumes were getting stronger. It was flammable. He could smell the chemical accelerant in the mixture. Jack whistled a low two-note signal he and Bruno had used in the Marines. Flank left. Bruno vanished into the dark. Jack picked up a discarded road flare from the ambulance kit. He cracked it. The red light hissed to life, blindingly bright in the gloom. "Hey!" he shouted, stepping into the open. The mercenaries spun toward him, rifles raised. Jack threw the flare. Not at them, but at the pool of blue liquid leaking from the fake belly inside the ambulance. The chemical ignited with a concussive whump. A wall of blue fire erupted from the back of the ambulance, blowing the doors off their hinges and sending a shock wave through the warehouse. The mercenaries were thrown back by the blast. The heat was intense, searing the air. "Run," Jack yelled. Bruno materialized at his side, and together they sprinted toward a service hatch in the floor that Jack had spotted earlier. It was a maintenance tunnel. Jack pried the grate open, his muscles screaming. He shoved Bruno down first, then dropped in himself just as bullets began to spark off the concrete around the opening. He pulled the heavy iron grate shut above them, plunging them into the damp, cold silence of the tunnels. Above them, the warehouse burned the blue fire, consuming the evidence, the ambulance, and the secrets of the night. Jack leaned against the wet brick wall, gasping for air, his lungs burning. He reached out in the dark and felt a wet nose press against his hand. "We're okay," he whispered, his voice shaking. "We're alive." But as the adrenaline faded, the grim reality set in. They had escaped the kill squad, but the woman was gone. The blue liquid, whatever it was highly volatile. And if that device was a bomb and it was connected to her, she was a walking weapon of mass destruction, and they were the only ones who knew she existed. Bruno let out a low whine and nudged Jack's pocket. Jack reached in and pulled out the scrap of scarf. It was damp now, smelling of smoke and the blue chemical. "You can still track her?" Jack asked. Bruno sneezed, shaking the soot from his coat. He looked down the long, dark tunnel that led away from the airport and toward the city. He didn't need to answer. He started walking, his nails clicking on the stone, leading the way into the underbelly of Chicago. The hunt wasn't over. It had just gone underground. The maintenance tunnel was a long, dripping throat of concrete that seemed to stretch endlessly under the frozen city. The air was thick with the smell of damp mold and the lingering acrid scent of the chemical fire they had left behind at the warehouse. Jack slumped against the cold brick wall, his chest heaving as he tried to pull oxygen into his burning lungs. Beside him, Bruno paced in tight, anxious circles, his nails clicking rhythmically on the wet stone. The dog let out a low, vibrating whine, nudging Jack's hand with a wet nose, checking for injury, checking for life. Jack reached out and buried his hand in the thick fur around Bruno's neck, grounding himself. They were alive. They had survived the ambush, but the image of the blue flames roaring out of the back of that ambulance was burned into his retinas. He closed his eyes for a second, trying to steady his racing heart, but the darkness only brought back the terrified face of the woman in the terminal. He needed answers. He needed to know why a squad of highly trained mercenaries had just tried to kill a cop and a dog over a piece of luggage. His hand went to his tactical vest. In the chaos of the warehouse just before the shooting started, he had swept the floor of the ambulance for anything that might identify the missing woman. He remembered grabbing a small leather object that had been kicked under the stretcher during the struggle. Jack pulled it out. It was a wallet. Expensive leather stained with oil and dirt, but intact. His fingers trembled slightly as he flipped it open. Inside there was no cash, no credit cards, just a single driver's license and a folded, worn photograph. He angled his flashlight beam onto the license. The name staring back at him hit him with the force of a physical blow. Sarah Evans. Jack stopped breathing for a moment. He knew that name. Every cop in Chicago knew that name. 2 years ago, Sarah Evans had been the face on every milk carton, every billboard, and every news station in the state. She wasn't just a random missing person. She was a brilliant molecular biologist, a rising star at a cutting-edge biotech firm downtown. She had vanished without a trace one rainy Tuesday evening, leaving her lab. No ransom note, no body, just a void where a person used to be. The official theory was that she had run away or had been the victim of a random crime. The case had gone cold within 6 months, but looking at the license in his hand, seeing the date of birth, the address, the face that was younger and fuller than the gaunt, terrified woman he had seen at the airport, Jack felt the cold dread of realization wash over him. She hadn't run away. She had been taken. He unfolded the photograph tucked behind the license. It was a picture of Sarah smiling, holding a toddler, a little girl with curly hair and bright eyes. On the back, in shaky handwriting, was a date from 3 years ago and a name, Emily. Jack's stomach twisted. The woman in the terminal had been screaming about her baby, but she wasn't pregnant. The belly was fake. So who was she screaming for? It clicked. She wasn't screaming for an unborn child. She was screaming for the child in the photo. They had her daughter. That was the leverage. That was how you forced a brilliant scientist to become a mule for a criminal syndicate. You take the one thing she loves more than her own life, but there was something else. Something that didn't fit. Jack thought back to the warehouse, to the complex machinery hidden inside the silicone belly. The tubes, the wiring, the blue liquid. Why would a drug cartel need a biologist? Why build such an elaborate containment system just to smuggle narcotics? You could hide drugs in a suitcase, in a tire, in a coffee can. You didn't need a life support system for heroin, unless it wasn't drugs. Jack looked at Bruno. The dog was staring down the tunnel, his ears swiveling, listening to sounds Jack couldn't hear. Bruno had reacted to the woman with a mix of aggression and fear. He had smelled the suitcase and recoiled. He had smelled the blue liquid and snarled. Bruno didn't smell drugs. He smelled sickness. He smelled a threat to the pack. Jack looked back at the empty silicone shell in his memory. The wires weren't just for heating. They were sensors, monitoring equipment, and the blue liquid. It wasn't the payload. It was the coolant. It was the stabilizer. The realization hit Jack so hard he nearly dropped the flashlight. The fake belly wasn't carrying the package. The fake belly was keeping the package dormant. Sarah Evans wasn't a mule. She was a host. Whatever they were smuggling, whatever biological horror they had cooked up in some dark lab during the 2 years she was missing, it was inside her. Not in a bag, in her blood, in her tissue. The device she wore was designed to regulate it, to keep her body temperature specific, to mask the radiation or the chemical signature from airport scanners. And now that device was gone. Jack stood up, the damp cold of the tunnel forgotten. The mercenaries at the warehouse hadn't just been cleaning up a scene. They were panicked. Clean it up, the voice had said. No loose ends. They knew that without the device, without the blue liquid stabilizing her system, Sarah was a ticking clock. Whatever was inside her was going to wake up. And when it did, it wouldn't just kill her. It would unleash something that a dog could smell from 50 feet away, something that smelled like death. "We have to move," Jack whispered, his voice echoing hollowly in the tunnel. Bruno looked up at him, sensing the shift in his handler's energy. The dog let out a sharp bark, ready to run. Jack shoved the wallet into his pocket. Sarah Evans was alive, but she was walking around with a biological time bomb in her veins. She was likely terrified in pain and desperate to get back to the people who held her daughter, thinking they were the only ones who could stop what was happening to her. But she was wrong. They didn't want to save her. They wanted to harvest whatever she was carrying, or worse, use her as patient zero. Jack gripped the flashlight, his knuckles white. He had been stripped of his badge, his gun, and his authority. He was a fugitive in the eyes of the law, but he knew something the entire Chicago Police Department didn't. He knew the victim's name, he knew the stakes, and he had the only tracker in the city that could find a ghost in a blizzard. "Find her, Bruno." Jack commanded, his voice filled with a dark, steely resolve. "Find Sarah." The German shepherd lowered his head, caught the scent of the damp wool scarf Jack had saved, and took off into the darkness. They ran together into the depths of the city, racing against a countdown that no one else could hear. The trail led them away from the industrial wasteland and into the crumbling outskirts of the city, where the streetlights flickered and the snow turned to gray slush under the tires. The scent from the scarf had guided Bruno with unerring precision to the Starlight Motel, a decaying two-story structure with a neon sign that buzzed ominously in the freezing wind. Jack parked the truck a block away, his heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. The dog sat rigid in the passenger seat, his eyes locked on a single door on the ground floor. Room 104. He didn't bark. He just let out a low, vibrating whine that spoke of pain and urgency. Jack checked his empty holster out of habit, cursing under his breath, and gripped the heavy flashlight tighter. He stepped out into the cold Bruno, moving like a shadow at his heel. As they approached the door, the smell hit them before they even touched the handle. It wasn't the chemical scent of the warehouse this time. It was copper and iron, the smell of fresh blood. Bruno nudged the door with his nose. It was unlocked. Jack pushed it open slowly, the hinges screaming in the silence. The room was dark, illuminated only by the street lamp outside, filtering through the thin, stained curtains. The bed was untouched, but a trail of dark droplets led across the carpet toward the bathroom. The door was cracked open, a sliver of harsh yellow light spilling out. Jack signaled Bruno to stay low. He moved toward the light, his breath caught in his throat. He pushed the bathroom door open, and the sight that met him froze him in his tracks. Sarah Evans was there, but she wasn't the heavily pregnant woman he had wrestled to the ground at the airport. She was slumped against the cold tiles of the bathtub, her shirt pulled up, revealing a stomach that was horrifyingly flat and marred by angry red welts where the prosthetic had been glued to her skin. But that wasn't the worst of it. She was holding a needle and thread, her hands shaking violently as she tried to stitch a jagged laceration on her side. She looked up as the door swung open, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond madness. When she saw Jack, she didn't scream. She didn't beg. A look of absolute despair washed over her face. She dropped the needle and grabbed a shard of broken mirror lying on the floor. She wasn't going to attack him. She raised the glass to her own throat. "No!" Jack shouted, lunging forward. But he was too far away. The distance was too great. The glass was inches from her jugular. But Bruno was faster. The dog exploded past Jack, a blur of motion. He didn't tackle her. He didn't bite to wound. He leaped and snapped his jaws gently but firmly around her wrist, the one holding the glass. The momentum stopped her hand midair. Sarah screamed, dropping the shard as it clattered harmlessly into the tub. She tried to pull away, sobbing, expecting the teeth to tear into her flesh, expecting the pain, but Bruno didn't bite down. He held her arm with a soft, controlled pressure, just enough to immobilize her. He looked at her, his amber eyes wide and filled with an intelligence that seemed to pierce right through her panic. He didn't growl. He didn't snarl. He let out a soft, mournful whimper, his tail giving a tiny, hesitant wag. It was a gesture of such profound empathy that it broke the tension in the room like a hammer striking glass. Sarah froze, staring at the animal that held her. She looked from the dog to Jack, her chest heaving. "Why?" She choked out, her voice raw. "Why didn't you let me do it?" They're going to kill her anyway. Jack moved in slowly, putting his hands up. Who is going to kill who, Sarah? We know about the ambulance. We know about the device. Just talk to me. Sarah slumped back against the tub, her energy draining away. Bruno released her wrist, but didn't leave her. He stepped closer and licked the blood from her hand, then rested his heavy head on her knee, looking up at her with unwavering devotion. Sarah's hand trembled as she instinctively touched the dog's fur, grounding herself in his warmth. They took her. Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the grime and blood. My Emily, my baby girl. She's only 3. Jack knelt beside her, ignoring the blood on the floor. The syndicate. She nodded, her eyes unfocused, lost in a memory of horror. 2 years ago, they came for me at the lab. They didn't want money. They wanted my mind. They wanted me to build something for them. A delivery system. Jack glanced at the flat stomach, then back to her face. The belly. It wasn't just for smuggling. No, she sobbed, clutching her midsection. It was a tank. A pressurized vessel. They forced me to synthesize a liquid toxin. Something that becomes a gas when it hits oxygen. Something that kills in seconds. They wanted to move it across the border, but the sensors kept picking it up. So they made me build a housing unit that looked like a pregnancy. Lead-lined. Biomimetic. It feels like flesh. It moves like flesh. She took a ragged breath, looking at Bruno, who was still resting his head on her leg, anchoring her to the present. They strapped it to me this morning. They showed me a live video feed of Emily. They had a gun to her head. They told me I had to board that plane. They told me if I made a sound, if I tipped off security, they would pull the trigger. Jack felt a cold rage burning in his chest. And the device, why did they take it back? Because your dog stopped me, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. When he attacked me at the airport, I thought he was going to kill me, but he didn't bite my leg. He went for the belly. He heard it. Heard what Jack asked. The trigger, Sarah said, her eyes locking onto Jack's. The device isn't just a container. It's connected to a dead man's switch, but biological. It syncs with a heart rate monitor. If my heart stops, it detonates. If I try to take it off without the code, it detonates. But it makes a sound, a frequency too high for humans. A pulse. Your dog... He heard the bomb counting down. Jack looked at Bruno. The dog hadn't been attacking a pregnant woman. He had been attacking the machine that was threatening her. He had been trying to rip the bomb off her before she walked through the metal detector, which would have triggered the magnetic failsafe. They intercepted the ambulance, Sarah continued, her voice shaking. They realized the mission was blown. They cut the device off me in the van. They have the toxin, Jack. They have the weapon. And since I failed, since I didn't get on that plane, they have no use for me. And they have no reason to keep Emily alive. She looked at the shard of glass in the tub. That's why I wanted to end it. If I'm dead, maybe they won't torture her. Maybe they'll just make it quick. Bruno whined again, pushing his nose under her hand, forcing her to look at him. It was as if he was telling her no. Not today. Jack stood up, his jaw set. You're not dying tonight, Sarah, and neither is your daughter. You said you built it. You know how it works. I know how to disarm it, she said, wiping her eyes. But I don't know where they are. Jack looked down at the dog who had saved her life twice in one day. We might not know where they are, but Bruno does. He tracked you here through a blizzard. He tracked that chemical smell to the warehouse. He can find them. He extended a hand to her. Sarah hesitated, looking at the broken woman in the mirror, then at the police officer, and finally at the dog who was looking at her with pure, unconditional hope. She took Jack's hand. Let's go get my daughter, she whispered. As they left the motel room, the snow was falling harder, burying the city in white. But inside the truck, the air was charged with a new energy. It wasn't fear anymore. It was the cold, hard determination of a mother, a Marine, and a dog who refused to lose. The motel room felt suffocating, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the heavy weight of a truth that was slowly suffocating the room. Jack stood by the cracked window, the flashing neon sign outside, casting long, rhythmic shadows across his face. He looked at the dog, resting his head on Sarah's knee, then back at the woman who was shivering not from cold, but from the aftermath of a terror that had spanned years. Something didn't add up. Jack had been a canine handler for a decade. He knew the protocols. He knew the behaviors. A dog didn't attack a victim unless he was confused or unless he perceived a direct, immediate physical threat to his handler. But Bruno hadn't protected Jack. He had targeted Sarah. Specifically, he had targeted her midsection. Jack turned from the window, his voice cutting through the silence. Sarah, I need you to explain something to me, and I need you to be absolutely precise. Sarah looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She clutched a towel to her side, the fabric stained dark. What at the airport? Jack said, stepping closer, his shadow falling over her. You said you were carrying a liquid toxin. A weapon. I get that. I get why the syndicate wanted it moved. But Bruno, he's a detection dog. He finds drugs. He finds explosives. He finds nitrates and gunpowder. He does not find biological agents. We never trained him for that. He wouldn't know what a liquid virus smells like. He crouched down so he was eye level with her. So why did he go crazy? Why did he attack you with a ferocity I have never seen in my life? If it was just a fake belly with some liquid inside, he might have sniffed it, maybe barked. But he tried to tear it off you. He acted like he was fighting a monster. Why? Sarah let out a shaky breath, her gaze drifting down to Bruno. The dog was watching her, his amber eyes calm and deep, a stark contrast to the violence of the morning. She reached out and touched his velvet ears, her fingers trembling. Because it wasn't just a container, Jack, she whispered. You saw the wires in the ambulance. You saw the electronics. I assumed they were heaters, Jack said, to keep the liquid stable, or maybe sensors to monitor the pressure. They were sensors, she corrected, her voice gaining a terrifying clarity. But they weren't monitoring the liquid. They were monitoring me. She pulled the edge of her shirt up slightly, revealing the angry red skin where the prosthetic had been adhered. But Jack looked closer this time. He saw small circular burn marks arranged in a pattern around her ribs. They looked like suction cup marks or electrode placements. The syndicate didn't trust me, Sarah said, her voice devoid of emotion like she was reading a lab report. They knew I was desperate. They knew I might try to surrender to security, or run, or even kill myself to stop them from getting the weapon. So they turned me into the trigger. Jack felt a cold prickle at the base of his neck. The trigger. The device. The belly. It was hardwired to my physiology, she explained. It had a pulse oximeter and an EKG sensor built into the lining. It was constantly reading my heart rate, my blood pressure, my biorhythms. She looked Jack dead in the eye. It was a dead man's switch, Jack. But it was smarter than a button. It was programmed with a kill algorithm. If my heart stopped, the device would detonate, instantly releasing the gas. That was their insurance against me committing suicide or the police shooting me. Jack swore softly. That explained the mercenaries' panic. That explained why they wanted her alive. But there was a second protocol, Sarah continued, tears welling up again. They didn't want me getting cold feet. They didn't want me trying to signal for help, so they programmed a stress threshold. If my heart rate went too high, like the kind of spike you get when you're about to scream for help or run, it would arm itself. It would start a 30-second countdown. If I didn't calm down, if I didn't lower my pulse, it would blow. Jack stared at her, horrified. They turned your own fear into a detonator. Exactly. I had to stay calm. I had to walk through that airport knowing I was carrying a plague, knowing my daughter was with a gunman, and I had to keep my heart rate under 100 beats per minute. If I panicked, everyone died. She paused, swallowing hard. But there was a flaw in their design, or maybe a feature. To keep the sensors synced with my heart, the device emitted a sound, a pulse. Every time my heart beat, the machine made a tiny, high-frequency electronic chirp. It was ultrasonic. Humans can't hear it. It's too high. It just sounded like silence to me. Jack looked at Bruno. The dog's ears twitched, but he heard it, Jack realized. Sarah nodded. He didn't smell explosives, Jack. He didn't smell the toxin. He heard the machine. He heard a mechanical beep syncing perfectly with the rhythm of a human heart. Beep, thump, beep, thump. And as I got closer to the security line, I started to lose it. I saw the TSA agents. I saw the police. I wanted to scream. My heart rate started to climb. Jack's mind raced back to the footage, the way Bruno had frozen, the way he had cocked his head. The machine started to whine, Sarah said. As my pulse sped up, the frequency changed. It was an arming tone, a warning. It was counting down. Your dog? He didn't hear a threat. He heard a bomb priming itself. But why attack? Jack asked, struggling to understand the logic. If he attacked you, your heart rate would skyrocket. That would detonate it. No. Sarah said, a strange, awestruck look crossing her face. That's the part you don't understand about the programming. I built it, Jack. I programmed the fail-safes. There is one exception to the high heart rate trigger, one specific physiological state where the machine is programmed to lock down and seal the canister instead of releasing it. What state physical trauma, she whispered. Impact. If I was in a car accident or if I fell down the stairs, a sudden massive spike in heart rate combined with a shock to the gyroscope sensors, the machine interprets that as an accident. It assumes the host is injured, not defecting. It engages a preservation mode. It locks the valves. It shuts down the trigger for 5 minutes to prevent an accidental leak during a medical emergency. Jack looked at Bruno. The dog was lying still, but his eyes were alert, watching the conversation back and forth. You're saying... Jack started, his voice trembling. You're saying he knew? I don't know how he knew, Sarah said, shaking her head in disbelief. I don't know if he understood the electronics or if he just understood the rhythm of the sound changing to something dangerous. But think about what he did. Jack, he didn't bite my throat. He didn't bite my arms. He launched himself at the device. He hit me with enough force to trigger the impact sensors. He terrified me enough to spike my heart rate instantly into the trauma zone. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. It wasn't an attack. It was a tactical reset. Bruno had engaged the safety mechanism the only way he could, by simulating a catastrophic accident. He bought us 5 minutes, Sarah said softly. When he pinned me down, when he wouldn't let me up, the device was in lockdown. If he had let me go, if I had stood up, the countdown would have resumed. He held me there until the paramedics sedated me. He kept the bomb from going off. Jack sank onto the edge of the bed, his legs suddenly weak. He looked at his partner with a new kind of reverence. He had always known Bruno was smart, but this was something else. This was a level of perception and decision-making that bordered on the supernatural. But that's not the only reason, Sarah added, her voice dropping to a whisper. There was something else. Something worse. Worse, Jack asked. What could be worse than a biological weapon detonating in a terminal? The scanner, she said. The body scanner. Jack frowned. The TSA scanners. They use millimeter waves. They're harmless. Not to this device, Sarah said. The trigger mechanism, it uses a magnetic solenoid to shatter the glass vials inside the tank. It's extremely sensitive to magnetic fields. Jack's eyes widened as the realization hit him like a freight train. The metal detectors. The wands. If I had walked through that archway, Sarah said, her voice shaking, the magnetic field of the scanner would have tripped the solenoid. It wouldn't have mattered what my heart rate was. The physics would have taken over. The canister would have ruptured instantly, right there in the security line. She looked at Jack, her eyes haunted. I was 3 feet away from the scanner when he jumped me. I was stepping forward. I was going to walk through. I didn't know about the magnetic flaw. The syndicate didn't tell me. Jack closed his eyes. He pictured the scene, the crowded terminal, families, children, Sarah stepping into the machine, a flash of blue gas, and then silence. Thousands dead in minutes. O'Hare turned into a tomb. Bruno didn't just hear the heart monitor, Jack whispered. He saw where you were going. He stopped you from walking into the kill zone. He saved me, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face again. He hurt me to save me. He knew I was walking into my grave and he tackled me to stop it. The room fell silent save for the hum of the heater and the soft breathing of the dog. Jack reached out and rested his hand on Bruno's head. The fur was warm, alive. He thought about the captain screaming at him. He thought about the termination papers waiting on a desk somewhere. He thought about the world calling his dog a monster. And he realized that in a world of high-tech surveillance, billion-dollar security systems, and human intelligence, the only thing that had stood between Chicago and an apocalypse was the hearing of a dog and a heart that refused to let a stranger die. He knew, Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. He knew the whole time, and I tried to pull him off. You didn't know, Sarah said gently. No one could have known. It's impossible. But he did. Jack said. He looked at Sarah, and if he's that smart, if he could track a frequency that human ears can't hear, then he can find your daughter. Sarah looked up, hope warring with despair in her eyes. How the trail is cold. We don't have the scarf anymore. We don't need the scarf, Jack said, standing up. His fatigue was gone, replaced by a cold, hard determination. The device on your daughter, the camera they showed you, was there? Sound. Sarah nodded. Yes, I could hear her crying. And was there a background noise? Anything? Sarah closed her eyes, thinking. There was a hum, like a generator, and a beep, a slow rhythmic beep in the background. Jack looked at Bruno. The dog was standing now, his ears pricked forward, listening to Sarah. That beep, Jack said. It's the receiver, the control unit for the bomb. It emits a signal to keep the connection with the vest. It's the same frequency, Sarah, just a different pattern. He grabbed his flashlight. Bruno heard the bomb on you. He can hear the controller. We just have to get him close enough to listen. Sarah stood up, wincing as she adjusted the towel on her side. Where do we go? Jack walked to the door and threw it open to the snowy night. The wind howled, but under it the city hummed with a million invisible signals. We go to the highest point in the industrial district, Jack said. We let him listen, and when his ears twitch, we hunt. Bruno trotted out into the snow, stopped, and looked back at them. He didn't bark, he just waited. He was ready for the next round, and this time he wasn't going to just stop a bomb. He was going to end the war. The wind howled through the cracked door of the motel room, carrying with it a sudden, unnatural silence that had nothing to do with the storm. Jack froze his hand, hovering over the doorframe. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, a primal warning system honed by years of combat and policing. He looked down at Bruno. The dog was no longer looking at the truck. He was staring into the darkness between the streetlights, his body low to the ground, his lips pulled back in a silent, vibrating snarl. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply became a statue of pure lethal focus. Get back, Jack whispered, shoving Sarah behind him. Before she could ask why the night exploded, a spotlight blinded them from the parking lot, cutting through the swirling snow like a physical blow. Glass shattered as a bullet tore through the motel window, missing Jack's head by inches and burying itself in the plaster wall. Jack tackled Sarah, driving her to the floor as a hail of automatic gunfire shredded the doorframe, sending splinters of wood flying into the room. Stay down, Jack roared over the noise, dragging her toward the bathroom. This wasn't a warning shot. This was a siege. Outside tires screeched on the ice. Heavy doors slammed. The sound of boots crunching on snow came from every direction. Front, back, the alleyway. They were surrounded. The syndicate hadn't just found them. They had brought an army to ensure nothing left this motel alive. Jack kicked the bathroom door shut and shoved Sarah into the empty tub, the safest place in the room. He peeked through the crack in the door. The front window of the motel room was gone, replaced by a jagged hole that framed the chaos outside. Through the swirling white flakes he saw them, shadows moving in the light, tactical teams, armored vests, night vision. They moved with the precision of a military unit, cutting off every escape route. We have the perimeter secured, a voice boomed from a loudspeaker distorted by the wind. There is no way out. Send the female out. Jack looked at Sarah. She was curled in the tub, her hands over her ears, shaking violently. She looked at him, her eyes wide with the realization that her nightmare had followed her here. They want the code, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They know I disabled the timer. They need the override sequence to rearm the payload. If they get me, they can activate the gas manually. Jack scanned the room for a weapon. He had the rifle he had taken from the warehouse, but he had checked the mag. 6 rounds, 6 bullets against a kill team of at least 20. And he had Bruno. Bruno was pacing the small bathroom, his nails clicking on the tiles. He wasn't cowering. He was looking at the small ventilation window high up on the wall. He whined, looking at Jack, then back at the window. They're coming in, Jack said, his mind racing. They won't wait. They'll breach the door in 10 seconds. He grabbed the heavy porcelain lid of the toilet tank. It was crude heavy and the only thing he had besides the rifle. He looked at Sarah. Listen to me. They want you alive. That is our only advantage. They won't spray the room with bullets if they think they might hit you. But they will kill me, and they will kill the dog without blinking. Sarah grabbed his arm. What are we going to do? We're going to give them a target, Jack said. He whistled to Bruno. The dog snapped to attention. Jack pointed to the main room. Guard. Bruno didn't hesitate. He burst out of the bathroom into the main room, letting out a roar that sounded like a lion. He didn't attack the door. He attacked the heavy curtains hanging by the shattered window, ripping them down in a frenzy of movement. Outside, the movement drew fire. The mercenaries saw a shadow moving and opened up. Bullets chewed up the carpet and the walls, but Bruno was low moving fast, creating chaos. Cease fire! The voice outside said, screamed, check your targets! We need the asset, Olive. The gunfire stopped instantly. In the ringing silence, Jack heard the sound of a card key sliding into the lock of the motel room door. The electronic beep was deafening. Jack stepped out of the bathroom, raising the rifle. He didn't aim at the door. He aimed at the fire sprinkler head on the ceiling. He pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the small space. The sprinkler head shattered. A split second later, the system engaged. Putrid black water that had been sitting in the pipes for decades exploded downward, drenching the room in a dark, oily rain. The door kicked open. 2 men in tactical gear stormed in, weapons raised, but their night vision goggles were instantly blinded by the wall of water. They stumbled, disoriented. Jack didn't shoot. He swung the toilet tank lid with all the force of a desperate man. It connected with the helmet of the first mercenary with a sickening crack. The man went down. The second man turned, raising his rifle, but he was too slow. Bruno hit him. The dog launched from the top of the bed a 90-pound projectile of muscle and fury. He hit the man in the chest, driving him back into the hallway. The mercenary screamed as Bruno's jaws found the gap between his vest and his neck protector. Jack grabbed Sarah and pulled her up. Move! They sprinted through the waterlogged room, slipping on the soaked carpet. Jack grabbed a flashbang grenade from the belt of the unconscious mercenary on the floor. He pulled the pin and threw it into the hallway where Bruno was fighting. Bruno recall. Jack screamed. The dog released his grip instantly and bolted back into the room. Jack kicked the door shut just as the grenade went off. Bang! The explosion rocked the walls. White light seared through the cracks. Screams of pain and confusion erupted from the hallway. Window Jack yelled. He smashed the remaining glass of the bathroom window with the butt of the rifle. It was small tight, but it led to the back alley. You first, he told Sarah. She scrambled up, slipping on the wet porcelain, and squeezed through the opening. She fell into the snow outside. Jack lifted Bruno. The dog scrambled through his paws, scrabbling for purchase. Jack heard the front door shatter again. More men were coming in. He vaulted through the window, landing hard on the ice in the alleyway. He grabbed Sarah's hand. Run! They sprinted down the narrow alley, the snow blinding them. Behind them, shouts echoed. They're in the alley. Flank them. Cut them off at the street. Jack's lungs burned. He knew the layout of this district from his beat cop days. The alley led to a dead end, a chain-link fence that separated the motel from an old lumber yard. If they could get over that fence, they could disappear into the stacks of timber. But as they rounded the corner, his heart stopped. A black SUV was parked across the end of the alley, blocking the exit. High beams blinded them. 3 men stood in front of the vehicle, rifles leveled. There was nowhere to go. Behind them, the team from the motel was closing in. In front of them, a firing squad. We have the package, one of the men in front shouted into a radio. Sector 4, no exit. Jack pulled Sarah behind a dumpster, the only cover available. He looked at the rifle in his hand. 2 rounds left. He looked at Bruno. The dog was bleeding from a cut on his flank, his breath coming in white puffs, but his eyes were burning with a defiance that refused to accept the odds. This is it, Jack thought. He looked at Sarah. She was shivering, clutching her side where the stitches had torn. I'm sorry, Jack whispered. Sarah looked at him, then at the dog. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. The photo of her daughter. Don't be sorry, she said, her voice trembling but fierce. Just promise me one thing. If they take me, don't let them take the code. Before Jack could answer, a voice boomed from the SUV. Drop the weapon. Send the dog out. Or we kill the man and drag the woman out over his corpse. Jack looked at Bruno. The dog looked back. And in that look, Jack saw a plan. It wasn't a good plan. It was a suicide run. But it was all they had. Bruno let out a low growl, his muscles bunching. He was measuring the distance to the gunmen. He knew he couldn't get them all, but he was willing to die trying to get one. Jack tightened his grip on the rifle. He wasn't going to let his dog die alone. On 3, Jack whispered. 1, 2. Suddenly the air above them ripped open. A spotlight brighter than the sun slammed down from the sky, illuminating the alley in blinding white light. The roar of rotors drowned out the wind. Dust and snow swirled into a hurricane as a police helicopter hovered directly overhead. "This is the Chicago Police Department." A voice thundered from the sky. "Drop your weapons! You are surrounded!" The gunman froze, looking up. The distraction was absolute. Now Jack screamed. He didn't wait for them to drop their weapons. He stood up and fired. 2 shots, 2 hits. The gunmen scattered, diving for cover. Bruno bolted. He didn't go for the men. He went for the driver of the SUV, who was trying to put the vehicle in reverse. The dog leaped through the open driver's side window, a blur of teeth and rage. The SUV swerved, crashing into the brick wall of the alley, blocking the path of the mercenaries behind them. Jack grabbed Sarah and ran toward the gap the crash had created. They squeezed past the crumpled metal, leaving the trap behind them, running toward the flashing blue lights that were flooding the main street. They had survived the kill box, but as Jack looked back, he saw Bruno still inside the crashed SUV, fighting the driver, and then he saw the man in the passenger seat pull a pistol. "Bruno!" Jack screamed, turning back. A gunshot rang out small and flat against the roar of the helicopter, and then silence. The gunshot that rang out in the alley hadn't missed, but it hadn't killed. The bullet had grazed Bruno's shoulder, leaving a streak of red across his dark fur, but the pain only seemed to fuel the fire in his eyes. He scrambled out of the wreckage of the SUV, limping slightly but moving with a speed that defied physics. Jack grabbed Sarah and pulled her through the side door of an old sawmill adjacent to the lumberyard, seeking the only cover left. They were trapped in a labyrinth of rusted machinery and sawdust, and the enemy was right behind them. Jack slammed the heavy steel door shut and jammed a crowbar through the handles. It wouldn't hold them forever, but it would buy them seconds. He spun around, scanning the dim interior of the mill. It was a kill box. Catwalks above, open floor below. If they stayed in the open, they were dead. "We need a choke point," Jack said, his voice calm, reverting to the cold precision of his Marine Corps training. "Up the stairs, to the foreman's office. It has glass walls. We can see them coming." As they ran up the metal stairs, Sarah stopped suddenly near a janitorial cart left by a cleaning crew years ago. Her eyes locked onto a jug of industrial ammonia and a bottle of bleach. The desperation in her face vanished, replaced by the sharp, analytical look of the scientist she was. "Give me your scarf," she ordered Jack. Jack didn't ask questions. He ripped the wool scarf from his neck and handed it to her. Sarah grabbed a bucket, pouring the chemicals together with terrifying speed. She wasn't making a bomb. She was making a chemical weapon. "It's chloramine gas," she said, soaking the scarf in water from a leaking pipe and handing it back to Jack. "Put this over your nose and mouth. Do it for the dog, too. The reaction is going to fill this floor with white smoke. It will burn their eyes and lungs. It will blind them." Jack pressed the wet cloth over his face and tore a piece off for Bruno, tying it makeshift around the dog's snout. Bruno didn't fight him. He trusted Jack. "Get to the office," Jack said. He shoved Sarah toward the upper room and then turned back to the stairs. He wasn't going to hide. He was going to hunt. The door below exploded inward. The mercenaries poured in their laser sights, cutting through the gloom, but they were walking into a trap. Sarah kicked the bucket of chemicals over the edge of the catwalk. It hit the concrete floor below and shattered. A thick white cloud hissed into the air, expanding violently. The mercenaries started coughing instantly, their shouts of confusion echoing in the cavernous room. They fired blindly into the smoke, their bullets sparking harmlessly off the machinery. Now Jack whispered. Bruno descended into the smoke. He didn't need to see. He could hear their heartbeats. He could smell their fear rising above the chemical stench. He became a ghost. He didn't just attack, he herded them. He would nip at the heels of a gunman on the left, forcing the man to stumble to the right, directly into the path of Jack's ambush. Jack moved through the smoke like a phantom. He didn't use a gun. He used the environment. A mercenary stumbled past him, wheezing, rubbing his eyes. Jack stepped out from behind a pillar, driving the butt of his rifle into the man's temple. The man dropped without a sound. Another gunman heard the fall and turned, firing wild bursts. Bruno barked from the opposite side of the room, throwing his voice a trick of acoustics. The gunman spun toward the sound, exposing his back. Jack took him down with a sleeper hold, lowering him silently to the floor. They were dismantling the squad piece by piece. Bruno was a blur of teeth and shadow. He would launch himself from the top of a lumber stack, knocking a man down, then vanish before the others could get a beat on him. He wasn't killing them. He was breaking their formation, turning their tactical advantage into chaos. But then the smoke began to clear, and from the entrance a slow, sarcastic clapping echoed through the mill. Victor, the head of the syndicate. He walked in wearing a gas mask flanked by two massive bodyguards who were sweeping the rafters with high-powered flashlights. But it wasn't the guards that made Jack's blood freeze, it was what Victor was holding. He had a remote detonator in one hand, and in the other, he held a radio. "Come out! Mr. Reynolds!" Victor's voice boomed, distorted by the mask. "Or I detonate the secondary charges I placed on the support pillars. I will bring this whole building down on top of us. I don't care if I die as long as I take the traitor with me." Jack looked up at the office. Sarah was crouching behind the desk, visible through the glass walls. Victor saw her too. "There she is," Victor sneered. He signaled his guards. They raised their rifles, aiming not at Jack, but at the glass office. Jack broke cover. He had no choice. He stepped out onto the catwalk, his hands raised. "Don't shoot her!" Jack yelled. "I'm the one you want." Victor laughed. "I want both of you, but mostly I want her to watch you die." Victor raised his pistol, aiming at Jack's chest, but he had forgotten the third player on the board. Bruno hadn't revealed himself. He had climbed the stacks of lumber until he was level with the catwalk, hidden in the shadows above the foreman's office. He was bleeding. His breath was ragged, but his eyes were locked on Victor's hand, the hand holding the detonator. Victor's finger tightened on the trigger of his gun, and then the glass of the foreman's office exploded outward. It wasn't a bullet, it was a dog. Bruno launched himself through the plate glass window from the inside out, shattering it into a million diamonds. He flew through the air, a missile of pure vengeance. He didn't go for the throat. He knew the threat. He went for the hand. Victor saw the dog coming at the last second. He screamed and slashed out with a combat knife he had pulled from his belt. The blade caught Bruno in midair. It sliced deep into the dog's shoulder, a horrific spray of red misting the air, but Bruno didn't stop. He didn't even flinch. The pain didn't matter. The wound didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the mission. His jaws clamped onto Victor's hand, the one holding the detonator. The bite was bone-crushing. There was a sickening snap as fingers were severed. The detonator fell from the ruined hand, clattering harmlessly onto the metal grating of the catwalk. Victor screamed a sound of agony that drowned out the gunshots from his guards. He dropped the knife, clutching his mangled stump. The weight of the dog's impact drove him backward over the railing of the catwalk. Jack lunged forward, not to save Victor, but to grab Bruno. Victor fell screaming all the way down until he hit the concrete floor with a final wet thud. The guards froze their leader dead. Jack raised his rifle, his face a mask of cold fury. "Drop them," he snarled, "or you join him." The guards looked at Jack, they looked at the dead boss, and they looked at the dog standing on the edge of the catwalk, blood dripping from his shoulder teeth, bared, ready to jump again. They dropped their weapons. Jack fell to his knees, pulling Bruno into his arms. The dog's legs gave out. He collapsed against Jack's chest, his breathing wet and shallow. The cut on his shoulder was deep, too deep. Blood was soaking Jack's uniform. Sarah ran down the stairs, ripping her shirt to make a tourniquet. She fell beside them, her hands pressing into the wound, crying. "Stay with me," Jack whispered, rocking the heavy dog. "You promised, remember. We go home together." Bruno looked up at him. The fire in his amber eyes was dimming, fading into a soft, tired haze. He licked Jack's hand once, weak and slow. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. The cavalry was coming. But for Jack, the world had shrunk to the rhythmic, fading beat of his partner's heart. He held the warrior close, burying his face in the fur that still smelled of smoke and snow, and prayed to a god he hadn't spoken to in years. "Don't take him," he begged into the silence. "Take anything else, but don't take him." The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The red and blue lights flickered against the grimy windows of the abandoned sawmill, painting the walls in chaotic bursts of color. The cavalry was coming. SWAT teams, police cruisers, ambulances. The full force of the law was descending on the industrial park. But inside the mill, time seemed to stand still. Jack Reynolds dropped to his knees on the blood-slicked concrete, ignoring the pain in his own battered body. His hands, usually steady with a weapon, were trembling as he reached out. "Bruno!" He choked out, his voice cracking. "Hey, buddy, stay with me." The massive German shepherd lay on his side, his chest heaving with shallow, ragged breaths. The wound on his shoulder was catastrophic, a jagged gash from Victor's combat knife that had severed muscle and nicked an artery. Blood pooled dark and fast beneath him, soaking into Jack's uniform as he pulled the dog's head into his lap. Bruno's eyes, once burning with the fierce intelligence of a hunter, were glazing over. They drifted, struggling to focus on Jack's face. He let out a low, wet whimper, his tail giving a single weak thump against the floor. Even now, dying on a cold factory floor, his first instinct was to comfort his handler. "Pressure!" Sarah screamed, dropping beside them. She ripped off her jacket, bunching it up and pressing it hard against the wound. "We need to stop the bleeding." Jack placed his hands over hers, leaning his weight into the compression. "You're going to be okay," he lied, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. "You hear me? We're going home. You promised." The sawmill doors burst open. "Federal agents, nobody move." A team of SWAT officers in full tactical gear swarmed the room, rifles raised laser sights sweeping the shadows. They saw the bodies of the mercenaries. They saw Victor broken and dead on the floor, and they saw a disgraced cop and a missing scientist huddled over a dying dog. Captain Miller was the first through the line. He wasn't wearing body armor. He was in his dress uniform, looking like he had sprinted from a press conference. He stopped dead when he saw them. He took in the scene with the eyes of a man who had seen too much violence, but this broke him. He saw the detonator lying near Victor's hand, the device that could have leveled a city block. He saw the empty blue canister. He saw Sarah alive, and he saw Bruno, the dog he had called a liability, the dog he had ordered to be caged, the dog he was ready to put down for aggression. Miller holstered his weapon and walked forward, his steps heavy. He looked at the detonator, then at Sarah. "It was real," Miller whispered, his face draining of color. "The bomb, the toxin, it was all real." Sarah looked up, her hands red with Bruno's blood. "He stopped it," she sobbed. He knew the whole time. He didn't attack me at the airport. He was trying to stop the countdown." Miller looked down at Bruno. The dog's breathing was hitching now, long pauses between each gasp. The captain fell to his knees on the other side of the dog. His hands, which had signed the order to detain Jack, now reached out to touch the dog's flank. I didn't know," Miller stammered, his voice trembling. "Jack, I didn't know." "Get a medic," Jack roared, ignoring the apology. "Get a vet, now." "Medic," Miller screamed at his team, his authority returning but laced with panic. "Get the tactical medic in here. This officer is down. I repeat, K9 officer down." A combat medic rushed forward, dropping his bag. He took one look at Bruno and shook his head slightly, but he didn't stop. He pulled out a hemostatic dressing and packed the wound, working with the same urgency he would for a human soldier. "I need a stretcher," the medic yelled. "We need to move him. He's lost too much blood." They lifted Bruno onto a tactical litter. The dog let out a sharp cry of pain, his head lolling back. Jack grabbed his paw, squeezing it tight. "I'm here, Bruno. I'm right here." They ran. A phalanx of police officers, federal agents, and medics ran through the snow, carrying the dog like a fallen king. They loaded him into the back of an armored ambulance. Jack climbed in. Miller tried to follow. "Sir," an agent said, touching Miller's arm, "we need to secure the scene. The chemical threat." Miller spun around, his eyes blazing. "You secure it. That dog just saved every life in this city. I am going with my men." He climbed into the ambulance and slammed the doors. The ride to the emergency veterinary trauma center was a blur of sirens and radio chatter. Jack held an oxygen mask over Bruno's muzzle, whispering a constant stream of reassurance. "You're a good boy. The best boy. Just hold on." Miller sat opposite them, staring at the floor. He looked at his hands, which were shaking. He looked at the detonator, now bagged as evidence, on the bench beside him. He realized with a sickening lurch that if Jack hadn't disobeyed orders, if Jack hadn't stolen his own dog and run, thousands of people would be dead, and Captain Miller would have been the man who let it happen because he couldn't read the truth in a dog's eyes. "I'm sorry," Miller whispered, the words barely audible over the siren. "Jack, I was gonna put him down." Jack looked up, his eyes hard and cold. "You saw a monster," he said quietly, "because that's what you expected to see. But he saw a victim." The ambulance screeched to a halt. The back doors flew open. A team of vets in scrubs was waiting. They took Bruno, rushing him down a white hallway, shouting vitals. Jack tried to follow, but a nurse stopped him at the double doors. "You can't go in there, officer. We need room to work. He's my partner, Jack yelled, trying to push past. Jack! Miller's hand landed on his shoulder. Firm. Grounding. Let them work. You can't help him in there. Jack slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He pulled his knees to his chest and buried his face in his arms. He was covered in blood that wasn't his. He was exhausted beyond measure, and he was terrified. Hours ticked by. The hospital waiting room filled up. Sarah arrived having been treated and released. She sat next to Jack, silent, holding his hand. Word had spread. Off-duty officers began to fill the room. Canine handlers from other districts showed up, still in uniform, their own dogs waiting in cars outside. They stood in a silent vigil, a wall of blue for the dog who had crossed the line. Finally, the surgeon emerged. He pulled off his cap, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked tired. Jack stood up, his heart hammering so hard it hurt. Well, the surgeon let out a long breath. The knife severed the triceps muscle and nicked the brachial artery. It was extensive damage. Jack felt the world tilting. But the surgeon continued, a small, tired smile touching his lips. He's a stubborn animal. We repaired the artery. We stabilized the blood loss. He's in recovery. Jack let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He's going to make it. He's going to make it, the surgeon confirmed. He'll have a limp. His working days are over, but he's alive. Captain Miller stepped forward, extending his hand to the surgeon. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. Jack walked past them, pushing through the doors into the recovery room. Bruno was lying on a padded table hooked up to IVs and monitors. He looked small without his vest, vulnerable. His shoulder was heavily bandaged. He was groggy from the anesthesia. But when Jack walked in, the dog's tail gave a tiny, almost imperceptible thump against the mattress. Jack walked over and kissed the top of the dog's head. I told you, he whispered. We go home together. Bruno let out a deep sigh and closed his eyes, finally allowing himself to rest. Resolution and moral 6 months later. The snow had melted from Chicago, replaced by the vibrant green of early summer. The air was warm, filled with the sounds of birds and distant traffic. On the wooden porch of a small cabin near the lake, Jack Reynolds sat in a rocking chair, a glass of lemonade in his hand. He wasn't wearing a uniform. His badge was in a drawer, retired. He had been offered a promotion, a Medal of Valor, and a full reinstatement. He had turned it all down. He didn't want the noise anymore. He wanted the quiet. The screen door creaked open. Sarah stepped out carrying a bowl of popcorn. She looked healthy, the shadows gone from under her eyes. She sat on the steps near his feet. She's finally asleep, Sarah said, smiling. It took 3 stories. Jack chuckled. She's got energy, that one. She asks about you, Sarah said, and him. They both looked toward the yard. In a patch of sun-drenched grass, a massive German shepherd was lying on his side. He had a noticeable scar on his shoulder, a jagged line where the fur grew back white. He moved slower now, a stiffness in his gait that spoke of old battles. But he was happy. A small girl 3 years old was curled up against his back, using the massive dog as a pillow. Emily, the daughter Sarah had fought so hard to save. Bruno lifted his head as Jack watched. He sniffed the air, checking the wind, checking the perimeter. Even in retirement, the guardian never fully slept. He looked at Jack, his amber eyes clear and bright. Then he looked at the little girl sleeping against him. He laid his head back down, letting out a huff of contentment. Sarah reached out and squeezed Jack's hand. We wouldn't be here without him. No, Jack agreed softly. We wouldn't. He looked at the dog who had lost his career but found a family, the dog who had been branded a monster by a world that couldn't see the truth. Voiceover. The world saw a vicious animal that day in the airport. They saw teeth and rage. They saw a threat. But they were looking with human eyes, eyes that judge, eyes that fear what they don't understand. But a dog sees with his heart. Bruno didn't see a pregnant woman. He saw a bomb. He didn't hear a mother's cry. He heard a countdown. He knew that to save her, he had to hurt her. To save the many, he had to become the villain. He took the blame. He took the knife. He took the pain. Because that is what they do. They stand on the line between the light and the dark, and they hold it even when we scream at them to stop. Sometimes the heroes don't wear capes. They don't give speeches. They don't ask for medals. Sometimes they just have four paws, a wet nose, and a loyalty that is the only thing keeping the world from falling apart. Look at your dog tonight. Really look at him, because you never know when he might be the only one seeing the truth that can save your life. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Let the world know that sometimes a growl is just a different way of saying I love you. The intel Sarah provided that night was precise. Within the hour, tactical teams breached a safe house 3 miles north of the city limits. They found Emily unharmed, locked in a back room, clutching a stuffed rabbit that smelled like home. The reunion at the hospital was the kind of moment that makes even the hardest officers turn away to hide their eyes. Sarah, still covered in soot and blood, fell to her knees as her daughter ran into her arms. The nightmare that had stolen 2 years of their lives was finally truly over. The syndicate was broken, their leader dead, their leverage yeeted. 6 months later, the bitter Chicago winter had retreated, replaced by the lush, vibrant green of early summer. The air was warm, filled with the hum of cicadas and the distant laughter of children playing in the lake. On the wooden porch of a small renovated cabin tucked away in the countryside, Jack Reynolds sat in a rocking chair. He looked different. The hard lines of stress that had etched his face for decades had softened. He wasn't wearing a uniform. His badge, the one Captain Miller had personally tried to hand back to him along with a promotion and a Medal of Valor, was sitting in a drawer inside. Jack had looked at the badge, then at the captain, and shook his head. He told him that he had fought his war. He had saved the world, or at least the part of it that mattered. And now he was done. He had chosen early retirement, trading the noise of the precinct for the quiet of the woods. He wasn't alone. The screen door creaked open and Sarah stepped out carrying a tray of iced tea. She looked like a different person from the terrified, gaunt woman in the airport terminal. Her hair was loose, her face filled with color. She set the tray down and sat on the steps near Jack's feet, looking out at the yard. They didn't need to talk much. They were bound by a shared history that went deeper than words, a friendship forged in the fire of a single terrifying night. "She is finally asleep," Sarah said softly, smiling at the yard. "It took 3 stories and a promise that we would go fishing tomorrow." Jack chuckled, the sound warm and easy. "She has got energy, that one. She is making up for lost time." They both looked toward the patch of sun-drenched grass near the oak tree. Lying there was a massive German shepherd, Bruno. He had recovered, but the battle had left its mark. A long, jagged scar ran down his shoulder where the fur grew back white, a permanent badge of honor. When he stood up to sniff the wind, he moved with a noticeable limp, a stiffness in his gait that would never fully go away. His days of chasing criminals and leaping over fences were over, but he didn't seem to mind. Curled up against his back, using his flank as a giant breathing pillow, was 3-year-old Emily. She was fast asleep, her small hand clutching Bruno's thick fur. Bruno lifted his head as Jack watched. He sniffed the air, checking the perimeter, the old instincts of a guardian never fully sleeping. He looked at Jack, his amber eyes clear and bright, free of the pain that had haunted them months ago. Then he looked back at the little girl sleeping against him. He let out a deep, heavy sigh of contentment and laid his head back down on his paws, closing his eyes. Sarah reached out and squeezed Jack's hand. "We wouldn't be here without him," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "None of us would." "No," Jack agreed, his gaze lingering on the dog. "We wouldn't." He took a sip of his tea, watching the sun dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the porch. He thought back to that moment in the terminal. The screaming, the chaos, the way the world had looked at his dog with hatred and fear. They had called him a monster. They had demanded he be put down. They saw a vicious animal attacking a vulnerable woman, but they were looking with human eyes, eyes that judge, eyes that assume, eyes that only see the surface. As the screen fades to a warm golden hue, focusing on the peaceful image of the child sleeping safe in the arms of the warrior who saved her, a final voiceover begins, deep and reflective. The world saw a beast that day. They saw teeth and rage. They saw a threat that needed to be neutralized. But the eyes of a dog see what we cannot. Bruno didn't see a pregnant woman. He saw a heart trembling in mortal fear. He didn't hear a mother's cry for help. He heard the silent digital countdown of a bomb. He knew that to save her, he had to terrify her. He knew that to save the innocent, he had to become the villain. He took the blame. He took the judgment. He took the knife. Because that is what they do. They stand on the line between the light and the dark, and they hold it even when we scream at them to stop. Sometimes to save us, they have to accept being misunderstood by the entire world. Look at your dog tonight. Really look at him, because you never know when he might be the only one seeing the truth that can save your life. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Let the world know that sometimes a growl is just a different way of saying I love you. The story of Officer Jack Reynolds and his partner Bruno teaches us a profound lesson about the limitations of human judgment and the boundless depth of loyalty. At the airport, hundreds of people witnessed the same event, a large dog attacking a vulnerable pregnant woman. Their eyes told them that Bruno was a monster, a threat that needed to be neutralized. They reacted with fear, anger, and condemnation, but they were looking at the world through the narrow lens of human logic, where actions are judged by their immediate appearance rather than their hidden intent. We often pride ourselves on our intellect and our advanced technology, yet in this story, all of our sophisticated security scanners and surveillance systems failed. It was the primal ancient instinct of a dog that perceived the invisible danger. Bruno didn't see a woman. He heard a countdown. He didn't see a victim. He sensed a heart racing in mortal terror. The lesson here is that truth is not always what is visible on the surface. Sometimes the things that look like aggression are actually desperate acts of protection. Furthermore, Bruno's journey reminds us of the purity of sacrifice. Throughout the ordeal, he was misunderstood, shouted at, and even hunted by the very people he was trying to save. Yet not once did he hesitate. He didn't need validation medals or understanding. When the moment came to jump through that glass window or take a knife for his handler, he did it simply because it was necessary. His loyalty wasn't transactional, it was absolute. Ultimately, this story challenges us to look deeper. It asks us to trust the instincts of those who cannot speak, but who often see the world more clearly than we do. It reminds us that real heroes are those who are willing to be the villain in the eyes of the world if it means saving a life. In a society quick to judge and slow to understand, Bruno teaches us that love is an action, not just a feeling, and sometimes the fiercest growl is actually a desperate cry to keep us safe. If this story reminded you of the unbreakable bond you share with your own pet, please hit the like button and share this video with a friend who loves dogs. And we want to hear from you in the comments. Has your dog ever sensed something dangerous that you couldn't see? Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage, mystery, and the incredible loyalty of man's best friend.